In this video I'm going to take my FT-817 ND and install in it the Sotabeams Lazerbeam Filter. This is a great radio, but I do feel, especially when I'm using CW, it could do with a little bit of filtering just to clarify the signal. So in order to do this, I've obviously purchased the kit from Sotabeams. I've downloaded and printed the instructions, and the next step is for me to get it on the bench and open up the case. To open the case, there are screws on the sides, the top and the back. There's no need to take the bottom off, but it is a good idea to remove these brackets. I've taken one off on one side. I'm going to take the one off on this side. So then there are two screws here at the top. The other two hold the speaker on, so there's no need to remove those. And this one at the back, which needs to come off. The ones for the bracket have flat heads. The ones for the rest of the body have countersunk heads, and the back one again is a flat head. When you open the case, you have to be careful because inside there's a cable for the speaker that's plugged into the board, which lifts off obviously, and then before you do anything else there are two ribbon cables on the PCB, so you need to be very careful about those. So I'll just remove these screws, open up the case, and then we'll have another look. Opening the case, it's easiest to pull it up from the back where it's sprung on, and then ease it off and forwards. Whoops, so I nearly pulled the speaker off. There's the speaker cable, out it comes, and there are the two sections on the board. Now let's remove the board. So there are two coax cables to remove, one here and one here. So I'll just pull those out very gently a moment, trying not to put pressure on the board. So they're released, and then there are these two ribbon cables, one large one at the front and one small one at the back. I just point to it with a screwdriver. Now the rear one, pull the tape off, and this will just pull out carefully, needs a bit of easing out. The front one again is taped in, so I'll use a plastic tool to touch things on the board as far as possible. Pull the tape off so it's no longer stuck, and then this latch, if I zoom in a bit, this latch needs to be lifted and then the cable will ease out, and it has a metal sleeve over it which I'll just take off for safety points. And I'll just go back to the rear end where this other cable is, and again that will just gently ease out. So there it is, it's out, and when I put the board back I'll probably tape that back to keep it out of the way. Okay, so let's just zoom back out a bit and look at the whole board again. So now I've released the two cables and the wires, and the speaker's already off. I can undo 5 screws to take out the board. So there's one in each corner and one in the middle, so I'll quickly do that. The last screw in the corner here has an earthing tag on it, so it's best to remove that and lift the tag out with it, keep it safe. So there it is. Okay, so now the PCB, the main PCB, is ready to lift out, and one thing to keep in mind is that towards the back, in fact underneath this white plastic socket, is a 3-pin connector, and we need to ease this up gradually so it comes loose and then reset it when we put the board back. And one thing I forgot to mention is this housing for the sockets on the side can hold the board in place, so sometimes it may be easier to loosen the bottom screws and just try and get that out as well. So now the board will just lift out. Here it is, and it's got the battery connectors through it. So there's the board, and I'll just clear up, put the casing to one side, put the board down and get ready to have a look and see how to fit the filter. So here's the board ready to work on, and I'll turn it around so the front is towards me. And there's the original filter. These are the filters that come with the radio, and if you have an optional filter, it fits onto these two sets of pins here and here. And if there isn't one present, which obviously there isn't, then I need to do stage 1, which is adding 2 capacitors on the other side of the board. And if I flip it over, we can see that they go here. There are a couple of large pins here and here where the filter are. I can't get them exactly. A couple of these larger solder joints, and one goes from there to one of these joints. I think it's that one, and the other one would go from here to somewhere else. So that's relatively straightforward. The one step of this project that I think is a bit tricky is adding some wires here. I think it's about here. There's a tiny capacitor that needs to come out, and a wire goes either side of it, and a third one onto this earthing post, ground connection. So I think that's a fairly delicate piece of soldering, and it has to be done very carefully. Otherwise it's relatively straightforward, and so now I'll get on with fitting the 2 capacitors. Here's the first one, and I've prepared it with a little bit of sleeving ready, and it's going to go from this contact here to that one there. So I'm just going to fit it in the board like that. So to prepare for everything, I'm going to put some new solder on these joints and also some flux so that they will melt nicely and easily. There we go. So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on the wire with a screwdriver so I don't get burnt, to press it down into the solder as it melts. Lovely. So I have the other wire ready in place. I've put some flux on it and a bit of extra solder, and here we go. Let's melt that one. I've done it right on the edge so it doesn't run the risk of contacting anything else. Step 1 is now complete and both capacitors are in place. I'm looking at the PC board now, and there are some wires to attach, including this screened cable that has to go either side of this really tiny capacitor just here. So I've decided that before I do any wiring at all, I'm going to remove this capacitor because it looks like quite a tricky job to me. So the first thing I'm going to do is just apply some flux either side of that capacitor. And then I'm going to add some low melt solder in a pink or purple reel either side of it to help me remove it in a moment with some tweezers. I'm going to use a very small soldering iron and tip. Some on that side and some on that side. I'm going to hold on to the capacitor and just try and ease it off the board. So there it is, and we can see just how small that is. I've just had a close look and I have 2 neatly freshly soldered pads here. So I'm now just going to put a bit more flux on those, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of fresh solder on them because low melt solder is obviously not suitable for soldering anything to. Here are the 3 wires now in place. The ground connection needed a large soldering iron tip. It takes a lot of heat to melt one of those, and then I used the micro soldering tip to solder these final 2 joints here either side of the capacitor, and they went on quite easily and quickly, and I've checked the continuity with my meter and everything seems to be fine, no problem with contacting anything else. So I'm now going to give that a clean up with some 100% alcohol and then move on to the next connection. Okay, so I've had a good look of that joint and it seems to be okay and clear, and I'm just going to check the continuity. That's fine. Make sure it hasn't contacted the resistor joint next to it. And I think that's now complete. So in summary, on the reverse of the board there's a switch connection, audio screen connection and a ground connection, and there's a red wire as well, but I've decided to fix that on the top of the board because I don't actually think it's long enough to go all the way around and back up to the filter board. So I'm going to flip the board over now and connect the red positive line. And that looks absolutely fine and ready to go over to the other side of the board. So the next step for me is to have a good look at everything as I move on to fitting the filter board in this area here and the various connections that go to that. Well, now I think I'm ready to put the board back into the FT-817, and as we can see here I've got the board upside down on top of the radio just to check I've done everything. So there are the two capacitors I fitted. Here's the switching lead and the ground lead and the audio connection that's screened, and all these have to come over at the same point. So I've just taped the yellow one down. I've tucked the ground one underneath the other ground. I hope that doesn't affect anything. I don't think it will. And I've had a little practice putting them into place to make sure they're in the right place. I haven't sleeved them because I don't think anything's going to contact anything, and it just became rather awkward. And in fact the ground lead is barely long enough to go where it needs to go, and the sleeving would stop it fitting. So it's ready now, and I'm going to just take a pause, put the PCB next to the radio and line everything up, and then I'll show you how I put it back in. And on to the next step. Here's the empty radio, and we can see here the 3-pin connector that needs to go into the board. There's the white socket for it, which goes in underneath. So what I need to do now is take the board, I've got the wires in the right place, pop it into the chassis and line up the sockets at the back so they drop into their holes, and then just let it drop onto the board, and that will line up with this socket, I hope. And all I need to do then is just push that down, and I felt the pins go into the socket, and push the rest of the board down, and there it is. And you'll see that I taped the ribbon cables front and back out of the way so I could put the board in. Here's the board inside the radio. Here are the wires, including this red voltage wire, and in a moment I'll be popping the board in and making the connections. I took the PCB out again to complete the wiring. To strip the screened cable I used a coax tool. This took a lot of setting up, but luckily there was a fair amount of spare wire. If I do a modification like this again, I will definitely cut the wires to length and prepare them before soldering on either side of the board. The two audio grounds are soldered together, and I put some tape around them before finally closing the case. The resistors are joined in series, and the middle point is soldered next to the power leads. One end goes to the ground of the filter board and the other is soldered to the yellow switch wire. With all that wiring complete, it was time to power up and test the FT-817 ND. I'm back now with the radio partially reassembled. I've connected some power and you can hear the static. And I've turned on the optional filter in option 38 of the menu and set it to CW. So we can hear the static, and if I make the option visible for the narrow or wide filter, there's narrow, there's wide. There's the static, and here's the static being filtered. So it's obviously working well. So now I'm going to take it upstairs onto the windowsill and try it with antenna and see if it can filter out some CW. You'll have heard on that clip just how well the filter worked straight away. I took it upstairs, stuck it on the windowsill, connected the antenna. Immediately I could hear competing stations and the filter was able to isolate the one I wanted to hear when I switched it to the narrow option. So I'm very pleased with that project so far. I've basically reassembled the radio. It is a squeeze to get the loudspeaker back in, and I need to figure out a better solution than the one I have, and I expect everybody does that in their own way. But anyway, it's complete. I'm very happy. Tomorrow I'm going to be trying it out with a 1-watt challenge. So that's very exciting because I may well be able to hear the stations I'm trying to contact, especially the low power ones, a lot better. If you're an FT-817 or ND or FT-818 fan like I am, then I think this is a great accessory to have. It can really improve the reception of your radio. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been helpful to anybody who is thinking of installing one of these Sotabeams Lazerbeam CW filter and the FT-817, and thank you for watching.